Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to this session of AMA, Ask Me Anything, where we are tackling the topic of diversity in the innovation ecosystem. As you heard, we are recording. So please, as we go through this evening session, remember to keep yourself muted. That way we can hear all the wonderful conversation that is going on today. So if you're not speaking, we just ask that you keep yourself muted. And then just to kind of give you a little tidbit about how our event is going to occur, if this is your first AMA. We're going to do a short introduction of our panelists. You probably already know what their names are, but we're going to go in and do it again, give you a little background on them, and then we're going to be taking questions from you, our attendees. So please be ready, fingertips ready to type your questions into the chat. I will say, just as a reminder, we have when you're typing your questions into the chat, that you post it to everyone. That way we can make sure that we grab it, and then we'll filter it. We have wonderful volunteers that are going to be sending me your questions to ask for the panelists. And if you can be specific to who you would like to ask, that would be also really great. Or if you want all of them, you can say that as well. Before we get started and do introductions, we want to spend some time and give a quick shout out to our wonderful sponsors. So we have OP Software, Hutchinson, 352, Infotech, Feather, Santa Fe College, Better Me Productions, and Trimark. So thank you to our wonderful sponsors, and we're going to go and do introductions. And let's start with our first guest, Dr. Wanda Eugene. So Dr. Eugene's passion is finding out new ways to use technology to engage underserved communities. She is the director of the Collaboratory for Women Innovators and the creator of Edit, the Entrepreneur Diversity in Information Technology, which is a free pre-incubator program that works with underserved minorities to launch tech-based businesses. In parallel with this work, she serves as a research assistant scientist in the University of Florida Herbert Wertheim College of Engineering in the Computer and Information Sciences and Engineering Department, where she explores how cultural, societal, and personal surroundings affects the appropriation of computational artifacts and ideas of how they can serve as a resource for the design of new technologies. In addition, she serves as the principal of Deep Designs, LLC, where she specializes in cultivating technology with vulnerable populations and integrates the strategic direction of the organization. Dr. Eugene holds a Ph.D. in computer science, a master's in industrial engineering, and a master's in interdisciplinary studies, specializing in instructional technology and African American studies, and a bachelor's in electrical engineering, no doubt. Our second guest, Nigel, hey Nigel, Nigel Davis, is the CEO of Grapevine. So Nigel is a South Florida native and a graduate of the University of Florida, where he received his bachelor's in computer science engineering. He currently works as a software engineer at Microsoft, where he aids in the development of enterprise, oh wow, I lost myself, enterprise software for a global customer base. In his spare time, he serves as the CEO of Grapevine, a technology startup with the mission of empowering underrepresented college students to feel a sense of community and belonging on their campus. It's worth noting that Grapevine was the winner of Start GNV's 2020 Josh Greenberg Onward and Upward Award for early stage startups. Congratulations, Nigel and Grapevine. Our third guest, Alejandra Nunes, serves as the talent specialist for Infotech, where she leads the design and development of solutions that support change management, drive performance, and organizational effectiveness, and enhances employee engagement, helping to cultivate the people-centric and inclusive culture that has been present since the company's founding. Entering its 40th year, Infotech consists of two core businesses. Infotech Systems provides software solutions that advance and automate construction, while Infotech Consulting provides expert statistical and econometric litigation consulting services. With a diverse workforce and collaborative, inclusive environment, Infotech is thriving. As a thriving Gainesville-born pioneer of innovation, committed to its family of employees, customers, and community. Alejandra is also an accomplished researcher and practitioner with a passion for elevating the voices of those often silenced, placing focus on diversity and inclusion efforts in the fields of economic insecurities, education, health disparities, health psychology, and disability. A proud member of the Gator Nation, go Gators, she earned her undergraduate degree in psychology with a minor in French and is currently completing her Master's of Science in Management with an interest in organizational consulting. In her spare time, she enjoys reading, painting, giving back to her community, and is hoping to earn her pilot's license this fall. Yes. Our fourth guest, Alyssa Brown, is a public relations and government relations executive with more than 17 years of experience in public and nonprofit settings. As Vice President of Public Policy at the Greater Gainesville Chamber of Commerce, she serves as a registered lobbyist at the federal, state, and local levels and leads the public policy team in being a proactive, collaborative, and regional partner that advances research, policies, and initiatives that support economic opportunity, business success, and community progress. She serves on the board of the directors of Colorful Talks, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that provides education and resources to help parents talk to their children about race. Before moving to Gainesville, Alyssa was an engaged member of the Capital Chapter of the Florida Public Relations Association, served as a member of the District Advisory Committee of the Leon County School Board, and served on the board of directors of the Florida Society of Association Executives, then the Tallahassee Society of Association Executives. Alyssa is a graduate of Florida State University. Alyssa is married to her best friend and a mother of two beautiful daughters and a spoiled Bashana Freeze. She loves to paint furniture and pictures in her precious little spare time. And she also loves to travel, especially to visit her family in her hometown of Boston, Massachusetts. And I am your host, Kira Simmons. I am a START GNV board member, proud, and I am also a senior assistant director for campus initiatives at the UF Career Connections Center. I also have the privilege of leading a local nonprofit here in Gainesville that services youth and families through training. And my focus in both of those areas, especially with UF, is underserved student populations. And so on behalf of the START GNV board, I want to thank our very accomplished panelists for joining us today for this important conversation. And I also want to say that I am thrilled to join you all and to learn more about your work in this space. So before we get in, I know that was a lot to take in. Before we get in, I want to remind you that we want your questions. This is about Ask Us Anything, I guess, at this point. Put your questions in the chat, post it to everyone, and we will direct that as time allows. And just to give you a little bit of time to get that going, we are going to kick it off by asking our guests a question so we can get to know them a little bit more. And to see what they're passionate about. So I'm going to start with Wanda. Is it okay if I call you Wanda? Yes, okay. So Wanda, you are doing all the things. You're doing all the things and you are everywhere as it relates to the innovation ecosystem. So as an engineer, a leader of an incubator, someone who is walking the walk and not just talking the talk of serving our underserved communities. From your perspective, can you tell us a little bit about the state of diversity and inclusion in the innovation ecosystem and help us understand why this is such an important conversation to have and it's critical for success?
Yeah, definitely. I think when it comes to looking at diversity and inclusion, ecosystem right now, especially across the state or even in our respective areas. We think about, I think about it, first of all, in that perspective, I think about it that in terms of um, diversity and inclusion is everyone having access to the same resources that they need with many different identities respected and brought to the table with a voice, and people being supported and having the opportunities to learn at their own pace with relevant materials, and people working together and having a sense of belonging. And so it reminds me of some of my prior work I did in accessible voting. And my two big takeaways from that was, if you're fortunate to live long enough, we're all going to end up with a disability, right? Or our abilities will change. And when you solve a problem with inclusion in mind, everyone benefits. So you create an auditory option, those with low literacy benefit. So when you think about initiatives with diversity and inclusion, the thing that often is missed is who's not at the table, what voices are not being heard, and what are the barriers that are sustaining the system, the status quo, right? And I think there's not enough conversations that have been historically held in that space. And so those have created some of those gaps that we've seen in diversity and inclusion. And those are the things that we have to really work towards overcoming. And so that's kind of been the focus of my work. And I think a lot of people on this panel can speak to it even in more detail, as been kind of what are the shortcomings in the space.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that. Nigel, I'm coming to you next. So your startup company uses technology to help people. Tell us about Grapevine and how it helps promote diversity and inclusion for underrepresented students, and what makes you so passionate about that mission.
Thank you for your question. So the mission of Grapevine is really to help students from underrepresented backgrounds feel a sense of belonging and community on their campus. And that's extremely important, as Wanda mentioned, that belonging element. So for me, it kind of came out of how I felt as a student. So I was a Black student at a predominantly white institution, and there would be a lot of times where I was the only Black student in one of my classes, and that was just very difficult. But I think when we think of diversity and inclusion, we can hone in on your ethnic background, but there are a lot of identities that are tied to that. Am I a first generation student? Am I a transfer student? I'm in a new state. I don't know what's going on as much as somebody from the state. Am I somebody with a different sexual orientation? Am I someone who, my high school education wasn't the same as everyone else's high school education? Am I a student who's transferring 2 years in? So really making sure that as a student comes to college and moves through the progression of college, that they have the opportunity to thrive and feel like they have people there. Because for every college student, your mental health is extremely important. And for most of us, we're going away from home. We're in a new environment. College is a lot more rigorous than high school. And we want to make sure that, in addition to those challenges that are just going to come with school, we don't want the additional challenges of, oh, I feel like I don't belong in this classroom. I have imposter syndrome, or I feel like, I don't belong in this state. I feel like I want to transfer somewhere closer to home. As it pertains to academics and success overall, when you can kind of alleviate or mitigate those feelings of not belonging, of I'm not supposed to be here, students do much better and are much happier overall. So our platform leverages different communities to allow students to connect with each other based on the numerous identities that each student has. I think as students or former students, a lot of times we may think of ourselves as, oh, I'm this, but you're so many different things. And exploring those communities and talking to people from within those communities let you understand, one, okay, I'm supported, this person has the same background as me, or I can, hear conversations from people who have a different background from me. Oh, I know, how I can be an ally to them. I know how I can make their college experience better and more fulfilling. So that's really the goal behind the platform. And I think we're starting to take some good steps in that direction.
It sounds awesome. And as you were talking in regards to like imposter syndrome, I know in my talks with students, that is a that's a real thing. It's a real thing. And, some of us on this call, probably all of us on this call have battled with it from one time or the other. So in that sense, it really creates that theme of sameness. I know we're talking about diversity, but like what we have in common as well, can we be at the table? Should we be at the table? Are questions that often go through our mind. Alejandro, I'm coming to you next because you seem like you, with your background with Infotech, that you've really created a space for people to be at the table. So can you tell us a little bit about Infotech's Diversity and Inclusion Committee? What inspired it? What are you up to? What are some key takeaways that you're looking forward to as a result of the committee? So if you want to tell us a little bit about that.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for having me. Yes. So at Infotech, we have been working hard for the past several months after everything that happened, during the summer, the unfortunate events. We really took a moment to look within. Like we've always tried to live by the standard of treating people right. And that's something every single Infotecher knows. It's called TPR, but also making sure that we are treating people right, identifying our blind spots and taking that time to reflect. And so within that moment, we had reverse town halls where we had employees come forth and speak on their behalf of how they were doing and kind of open themselves up to have those conversations at work. And along those conversations, we started to look, well, okay, how do we make this sustainable? We don't want to make just a check the box, we did it, paperwork, we're done, move forward. So with that, we decided that given our size and capacity and everything that we wanted to do, the best bet was a committee made up of 10 amazing Infotechers that stepped up and applied to be on it and shared their passion. And they come from all sorts of departments, different levels, different leadership levels, different backgrounds, abilities, and perspectives. And so we made our amazing, we call it our CDI, Committee for Diversity and Inclusion. And we had our first meeting in September. So we got it up and running in probably around 2 months. With the whole application, we made a charter, and we have 4 pillars, which is 1, making sure we're, educating our employees and bringing awareness to different events, activities going on, awareness to even doing like unconscious bias workshops and all these types of things. The other one, just celebrating too, and just being celebratory of the events that are going on. It's not just the holidays, but including a floating holiday where our employees can celebrate a holiday that really contributes to them and that they wish to celebrate. And then also just going out there into the community and connecting with people and trying to bring that community around us within. And so we've been doing a lot of events, celebration. I was just talking to the people before the call that we had a soul food cooking today with one of our Infotechers because we're celebrating Black African American History Month. So she had a whole array of cameras, and one of our presidents, Jamie, was on the call cooking alongside her, and she was so proud. She cooked her collard greens. And so, doing things like that, but at the same time looking internally and, assessing how we're doing analysis of our processes. We have an inclusive language task force that's working on, going through all our documents, whether that be for products, internal documentation, and making sure we're using inclusive language. And we have really taken the step forward, I think, it's just understanding that we need to look at our blind spots and work towards, addressing them. And so we've done a lot of array of different things. It's been great. Like I mentioned, celebrations, and I'm really just looking forward. Each month is something new, and just taking an almost a design thinking approach to it as well, of just iterations and going through it and making sure that we're not just going one and done. It's going in, okay, how can we make it better? What else can we fix? What else are the needs of our employees, and how do we go in there and fix that as well? Whether that be systemically through processes, so simple as a Slack post to remind people of a particular celebration, really taking that step forward and looking how we're doing to make sure that we are being inclusive. It's one of our pillars as well now too. So looking at our facilities and everything, it's been wonderful, honestly, and I'm so glad that we're able to have that experience.
Thank you for sharing. I love the fact that Infotech is taking a comprehensive look at diversity and inclusion, because yes, you can do an overhaul of policies and look at all these things, but small things like a or small things like, reminding people of holidays is definitely actionable. So, at this point, it's like there's no excuse for you not to go down this road, right?
No, absolutely. And it doesn't matter what size company. I think that you can do you can do it. You don't have to be a big company to make big change.
Absolutely. Alyssa, so the chamber has last year really got into kind of creating this space for dialogue, and really was progressive, I think, in creating this space where you partnered with Gainesville Black professionals to do Crossroads, and that's a discussion series that they explored the intersection of race and business. Can you tell us about that initiative, what spurred it on, and why do you think diversity and inclusion initiatives are so essential to local economic development? It's the business case.
Sure. So like many others, last summer was a pivotal place for the chamber. Business isn't great about talking about, in a genuine way anyway, it's not great about talking about real diversity, in the context of acceptance more so than compliance. And so what we wanted was to start a conversation. So I'll just back up and say, literally the way it started was, it was a Sunday, and it was right around the time I think there had been the march right downtown. And it was a place or a time when we were hearing a lot of corporate voices enter the conversation that we hadn't heard before. And our members were calling us. When you work for the chamber, everyone has your phone number. And so we were all getting separate phone calls. They were sad, they were upset, they were confused, just kind of a range of reactions. And so I called Eric, because I fell back into my PR mode, and I said, Eric, we need to put out a statement. We really need to say something. I think our members expect that from us. And he said, no. I said, what do you mean no? I don't want to say something. If we're going to say something, we need to say something about what we're going to do. What are we going to do? It's not like this issue is new. It's front of mind because of what happened, but this is an issue every day. So if we're going to say something, it needs to be about what we're going to do to try to address it and bring it to front and center and keep it there, because it's an issue that doesn't go away. And at first I didn't really know, what we needed to do. I didn't, the other thing with working, I think, for any organization is that you don't want your reaction to come across, as patronizing, or somehow just off the mark. And so I called Virginia Grant with Gainesville Black Professionals, and we sat on the phone for 2 hours because, I wanted to kind of just noodle over what would be meaningful, in this moment, and at the beginning of at the end of the day, at that point, it felt like, it felt like a funeral. We just needed time to talk. When someone passes away in your family, you all come together and you sit around, because it's comforting. And so that Friday, we had a fireside chat. Well, and it was Gainesville Black Professionals that sponsored it, but there were so many people on. And, it was that week that we decided we needed to facilitate regular conversation because, work is a place where people are least comfortable talking about race. They don't talk about it. And, especially the larger the company is, at least, in terms of what we've seen, the more structure there is around how to talk about it, but it might not necessarily be the right structure. So I mentioned compliance a moment ago. When the Civil Rights Act passed, every time an act passes for businesses, that's a cue to determine what you need to do. And this sounds bad, but I mean, it's true. What do we need to do to comply with this so we don't get sued? And so in the 1960s, that very much was it. We need to comply with this law. We can't discriminate, on the basis of race, sex, religion, any of those things. So how do we comply? And so, in the same way that mentalities get passed down through families, through generations of workers, that mindset was really pervasive and still is pervasive in some businesses. And so we felt like having regular conversations that were very, very frank would help us kind of get past that point, first and help them understand that we're not talking about compliance. We're talking about changing your culture. And so the way that we did that was we didn't want to do anything that was PC. And I know, people aren't going to just say out loud what they think because they're always worried about retaliation. They're worried about being judged or saying the wrong thing. And so we collect questions and comments anonymously. We have a form. There's no identifying information. I'm the only one who has the password to get in and get the information, and I delete the responses after I take just the questions out, so there's no IP address or anything, because we want them to feel safe saying exactly what they think. And when we moderate, we, ask those questions exactly as they are. And sometimes it's weird. I'm the one who's reading them, and on our first Crossroads, I remember specifically having a response from someone who started off the message with, "To tell you the truth, I really don't like Black people. I work with a lot of them. I don't think they know. I'm cordial. Why is it wrong for me to feel this way?" But that actually ended up being a prompt for one of our best and most frank discussions. And so, it's, on the one hand, you think, okay, this is just talking, but on the other hand, it's really talking, and that's something that I think from a chamber perspective, because, many chambers, chambers in general tend to be just conservative in the way, I don't even necessarily mean just politically, they're conservative in the way they operate. They are stand-up traditional navy blue organizations. And to lead this conversation, I think gives some of our members courage to want to explore how they can change their companies and in doing so prompt cultural change around race in the economy. Really quickly, Kiera, to answer the second part of your question from an economic development standpoint, racial justice, a focus on equity, all of those things when it comes to attracting companies, attracting workers, have become a currency of sorts, and especially in the demographic from age 22 to about 40 or so, there's a desire to see that the community that you're moving to wants to, is trying to be different culturally, and it's trying to be accepting. There's a desire to see that all people can find a place in that community and that there's something there for them. And there's a willingness to encourage that. And so, this is something I think any community that's not focusing on this, doesn't have that currency and is going to be in a position where eventually it's going to be harder to attract potential workers there. And if you don't have the workers, companies won't come either. And so, we need to take this journey for the viability of our own economy, and individual companies need to take it, because at the end of the day, if consumers don't see that you're taking these steps, then it does hit your bottom line.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as you were talking, Alyssa, I was thinking about that Brene Brown book and vulnerability, and how this is really centering conversations about how can we make this space a place where people can freely feel and state how they're feeling and how they're being. So I definitely, that resonated with me for sure. There are questions pouring in, so I am going to go to one of them. And the first one is for you, Alyssa. Our participant wants to know, what drew you to become a lobbyist and how did you get started?
I started my career in Tallahassee. I moved there from Boston, Massachusetts, with my parents when I was 9. And so I went to school there, went to college there. And if you work in PR in Tallahassee, chances are, there's a public affairs bent to it. And so I just, was involved in it kind of from day one for a couple of trade associations. And then I actually worked for the legislature. And so really it was just knowing the process, moving here. So we moved to Gainesville because my daughter has congenital heart defects and we wanted to be close to her cardiologist. And when I got here, I came to the chamber as communications director, but just, having the background that I had made me a natural fit to kind of step in and help with some things. I think at the time that I came on, Kamal Latham was our vice president of public policy. And so I did a lot of work with him. And then after he departed, for a while, we didn't have a VP. And so I just kind of started filling in, in some ways, so that things kept going, and just ended up in the position in order to do this job in particular. I mean, you have to register as a lobbyist in order. I'm sorry, one of my little coworkers, honey, I'm on a panel right now. You have to go out. I love you. Goodbye. This is like Dory. I can't.
It's good. This is like
I can't. So yeah, you have to be registered, legally in order to talk to lawmakers about legislation to try to sway them one way or the other. So really, it's just a registration thing. But my work has always kind of centered around influencing policy.
Awesome. Our second question is for everyone. So anyone can kind of put their hand up if they want to chime in first. But what are good ways for people to learn about the diverse experiences of people of color in the workplace without asking people of color to explain their experiences and burdening them with trying to explain? What are your thoughts with that? Anyone want to tackle that first? Allie, go ahead. You can.
Yeah, I can share what we've done. I think we've took it from the perspective of allowing all perspectives, not just people of color too. Because there's different, abilities, backgrounds, like Nigel was mentioning, even just where the school you grew up and how that affected you is important to take into account when you're trying to be inclusive. So we did something that we called Rise and Shine Together. So for 30 minutes, we randomly paired up people across the company that don't normally work together. And so we paired them up, just array of different people around the company. And with that, we had some kind of questions that were guiding questions. And one of them being, I believe, was, what's something people often assume of you? And I feel like almost everyone has something that came to your mind right now when I said that. So allowing for that opportunity to just have that exchange of experiences, even if it is in a short minute, it's more about creating, I know a lot of times people say a safe space, but you also have to create a brave space where people feel like they can have a voice and they can share that background. So something as simple as that could be a good way of just starting the conversation and trying to embed that into the culture so it doesn't feel like, why are we doing this? Because it's a change, it's a cultural shift if that's not something already ingrained. So starting small might be good.
Great. Nigel, go ahead.
Yeah, to expand on that, I would say one way that you can kind of understand the experiences is to go where those people are. So if you're trying to have one-off conversations, everyone's not necessarily going to be a talker. But if you go to an event where, a lot of those people of a similar background are, the people who are vocal about how they feel are going to be vocal, and you're going to get somewhat of an understanding. And you always have to keep in mind that one person's perspective isn't everyone's perspective, and nobody's speaking on behalf of an entire community. But just like with any community, if you hear the same kind of themes pop up, it could be like, okay, this is a thing to keep track of. As I'm talking to a person, from this background, this seems like a thing that they're going through at this moment in time. So it doesn't even necessarily have to be like a specific conversation, or you could, when you put yourself into those situations, have a conversation with the people who seemed the most vocal. Those are usually the ones who are ready to talk about it. I know at Microsoft, we had a large group discussion last summer within our team and then like the broader team. And there were a couple of people who were very vocal about their experiences with discrimination and racism. And those were the people who were reached out to afterwards for, oh, can you tell me more about this? I want to learn more. And they're always going to be open. So I think it can be difficult determining who those people are without going into that open environment where everybody feels comfortable sharing as they see fit. But once you can maybe identify who those people are who are very vocal about how they feel with regards to their cultural background and how it affects them on a day-to-day basis, engaging with those people can be really helpful.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Wanda. I see you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Actually, it reminded me of this past summer with everything that was going on. I kept getting text messages and phone calls, and I stopped answering them. I don't. It was just like it was, and like the question said, it was just a lot. And was infuriating, because it was like, you want me to explain 400 years of racism and oppression? Read a book. Like, there's so much material out there. Read a book, watch a movie. Like, and to the point where me and some of my colleagues, like, we compiled a list. If you read books, here's some books. If you want to watch, if you want to blog, here's a blog. Here's some movies. Here's some, there's like, just like we tell our students, do your research, right? Like, kind of, there's so much material out there before you start asking, you know, like, explain to me this, or what's happening, or I don't understand. Like, do some research, right? And like, and therefore you can actually have an intelligent conversation, as opposed to, like, I know that you are processing and living through all this in real time, but in the midst of your own unpacking of your own trauma, can you explain to me what's going on? And it's just like, that is way too much to ask a person of color, especially in this day and age when we have so much resources and materials at our disposal. So that's always my first thing. Like, and this is something that we tell our, you know, like, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and the first thing I tell my entrepreneurs when engaging, like, we had a speed networking event, and I was like, do not go to these mentors asking basic questions that you can find by reading a book, doing a basic search, right? Like, come in there with a very informed, detailed question that shows that you've put some thought and that you're actually vested and want to learn this information. And so that's the first point of that I always point people to.
Go ahead, Alyssa.
The one thing I would say, you know, is sometimes, especially depending on the timing of when you're asking, you know, depending on what's going on, maybe you don't ask. You know, you can go to a person if you know, that based on what's going on, this person is likely to not be feeling good about it. You can always just go to them and say, I just want you to know, I know what's going on, and I'm here if you want to talk. And that leaves a doorway open for them, because at some point they probably are going to feel like talking, or they might have questions, you know, even for you. And that way you're not asking anything of them in that moment, but you're letting them know that you're available. And so you may not get your answer in that moment, but at least you've opened a door.
Absolutely. I love all of this feedback that's coming. And one of the things that is coming to my mind is that people can sense when you are being inauthentic and not sincere. So if you're asking because the topic is trending, you're unlikely to get sincere response. So I would really encourage people to see and hear the person and be sincere in your wanting to develop a relationship with that person before you go deep into to uncover wounds that may be there, and ask them to go into that space with you. They have to see that you're vested in caring about who they are as an individual before you unpack that stuff. So we do have another question. This one is from Grant, where Grant feels like folks with privilege have some culpability and complicity in any lack of diversity in an organization if they aren't actively making efforts to be more inclusive. So what are some ways folks with privilege can contribute to making sure everyone feels welcome at the table in ways that don't feel patronizing? Grant has his own biases, but feels like this is a great opportunity to listen. Any thoughts in regards to Grant's? Yes, Alyssa.
Two things. One, you know, change your own mindset and don't presume that you own the table. It's everyone's table. So think of it that way, talk about it that way. And then the other thing that you can do is be vocal. And I know that that can be hard, because sometimes if you don't communicate support for someone who's being attacked in exactly the right way, you can face a backlash sometimes. And you know, that's a whole different question, honestly, but be willing to speak up, you know, on their behalf. Privilege is all relative. It depends on what the scenario is. I mean, you can be privileged in many, many, many ways, and you don't have to be white to be privileged in some ways. I mean, I think it's a scale, you know, it's all relative to what's happening. But whatever your privilege is, you know, if you are a white person and, you know, God forbid, another incident like George Floyd happens, or, you know, and I say God forbid, but we know it will happen. You know, when it does, be willing to say how you feel about it. If you don't like it, if you think it's wrong, you know, be willing to say that, be willing to join your Black coworkers, friends, you know, church family, whomever, and saying, you know, this is wrong, you know, and I'm on the right side of it and I want to do what I can to make it stop.
Thank you. Anyone else want to chime in? Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, I would say just the way that the question was phrased was interesting, because I know there's a lot of like, you know, if you have privilege and you're not, you know, taking this big action, then you're like at fault. But I know we kind of talked at work how, you know, everyone's personality is different. So everybody's not necessarily going to be able to be that extremely vocal person to, you know, bang on the table and say like, these people, you know, deserve, you know, equity in what we're doing. So I think finding within your personality, whatever suits you. So if that's, you know, I think it starts with definitely understanding what everyone's identity is to the best of your abilities. So then you understand, okay, I have privilege in this situation. I can use that privilege to help somebody, but I don't think it necessarily has to be in overt action. It can be like Alyssa mentioned earlier, coming to somebody and saying, I know, you know, what you're dealing with. If you want to talk, you know, come to me. That's using your privilege as somebody who is not dealing with those outside challenges and, you know, talking to somebody, giving them an ear to lean on. So I think if you are one of those people who can very strongly, you know, talk to somebody in management and say, we need to hire more diverse candidates, or we need to do something like that, then I would definitely suggest doing that. But I know everyone's personality and character isn't going to, you know, allow them to easily, you know, make those, have those conversations. So whatever it is within your personality, I would say go for it. And like Ali mentioned earlier, just being brave. I think it takes a level of bravery and stepping out of what might be in your own best interest and, you know, what's in the best interest of the whole. If I was in that situation, because like Alyssa said, privilege shifts depending on, you know, what the scenario is. So being brave and saying, okay, with, you know, the feelings that I have, the personality, the character that I have, I think that this, you know, is a good avenue for me. So I don't think it's necessarily one size fits all, but, you know, whatever is a way that you see that, you know, you feel comfortable helping and, you know, empowering others, go for it.
Great, thank you for that, Nigel. Our next question, I believe, is for Ali, but maybe everyone can chime in on this. How can companies create genuine, authentic celebrations of culture and prevent the perception of just superficiality in the presentation of cultural events?
Yes, that is a wonderful question and definitely one that we try to check ourselves too. From our perspective, it was made a little bit easier in the sense that, you know, we have the representation within our committee of our Infotech employees, and not of everyone, obviously, but a good amount. And so in that, we're always trying, you know, we know our community, we know the people that we have, and so providing education in the celebration, I think has helped too, because a lot of times you know about Chinese New Year, Kwanzaa, but do you know why they exist, how they came about, what they actually represent? And so providing some form of education along those lines, and not just saying, hey, happy Chinese New Year. What does that mean? And why is that important to that particular community, I think has been an important aspect of how we celebrated Infotech. Also, you know, when we made a graphic for the Chinese New Year post, and we asked one of our subcommittee members. Within the committee, we have subcommittees, and those are people that aren't directly on the committee, but would like to be involved if there's a need for extra helping hands. And so we reached out to one of them to pretty much figure out, was the graphic relevant? You know, we're not Chinese and we may not celebrate it, but how do you resonate to it? And so making sure you're educating, I think, along the way yourselves. We may not have all the answers, but being okay with going out and searching them, and just kind of doing your own research in that and understanding, I think, is important, and adding that educational piece so it doesn't feel like we're being inclusive, here's a happy Chinese New Year post, you know, just I think that takes it to a whole nother level of intentionality.
I will also add just sometimes things may seem superficial at the beginning, but sometimes things just need to be normed. And if you have to go through that process to norm it, then embrace that. And then, you know, maybe that's the level people can engage in right now. And that's a step forward. And once you norm that, you can go deeper with some things as well. So don't discount those efforts to move forward as well. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
I think I'd like to add based on what you said, which is a great point. Yeah, definitely, you know, we've always said we may not get it right the first time, but we're going to keep trying to get it right. You know, if it doesn't work for your culture, keep trying different things that may resonate with your people. If it's events, if it's, you know, bringing speakers in, what really ties in those celebrations and really gets the conversations going is important as well. So taking a look and making sure it's not just, this is what I found on this random article, I'm going to try it out. Maybe try it out, but shape it so that it fits your culture as well as important.
Absolutely. Alyssa, we have a question for you. As the VP of Public Policy, anything our viewers can do to make an impact with our public officials?
Oh, that's a great question. And so, yes, the first thing I think that anyone can do with a public official is just set up a meeting just so you get to know them. You know, if you ever want to interact with a public official on any issue, it's easier to do if you already know them. You know, if you've gone in, because they have office hours, so you can call up and make an appointment with any of them. If you're in the district, they will sit down and they'll listen to you and maybe engage. They may have policy initiatives that speak to what you're there to talk about. But I mean, just having a relationship with them is good. You know, I don't ever like to go to any lawmaker and ask them for anything if I don't know them. It's like going up to someone on the street and asking for their coat. It's just weird. So you just need to establish a relationship with them. And once you know them a little bit, I think it'll kind of come naturally to you what's going to be of interest to them, what's not going to be of interest. And it's easier for you to just call them up and say, I'm concerned about this. Sometimes also they need voices, you know, a lot of the time they need voices, you know, of their constituents, especially people who are willing, you know, to work at an issue and just don't want to rail against something from an uneducated standpoint. And so if they know that you're willing to talk through an issue and that you genuinely want to see some good come out of whatever it is you're approaching them about, then they usually will, one, they're going to listen, but if there's a forum where they might be able to help you amplify that, oftentimes they will.
Thank you. Wanda, we do have a question for you, and then Nigel, maybe you can follow up. In technology, there's often the default of whiteness, wherein products are designed for white users. This shows in issues of tech with facial recognition, for example, where skin color, eye shape can cause issues. Beyond testing our tech with persons of color, how else can we prevent building to that default of whiteness?
I think a lot of that is said by who's the, you know, that goes back to that who's at the table, who's in the room during the building, right? Like oftentimes the people who were there making those decisions is often reflective. That's reflected in the technology, right? And so it was interesting. I remember for a long time there was this whole conversation in the software space that software had no bias, right? Like software is just ones and zeros and there's no bias. And I remember I would argue for years, like when I first started grad school, like that makes no sense, because if there's a human being behind it that's building it, that human being builds from their perspective, their experiences, right? We all look and integrate in life from our own tilted lens, right? And so everything I create is going to have my cultural bias in there. When you have a lack of cultural diversity in a room creating that technology is going to reflect that. And so whoever's in that room or who's not in that room, those are oftentimes the perspectives that are going to be missing in how that technology is designed. And so oftentimes you hear a lot of companies talk about, you know, diversity, and it's who their customers are, their clients, or how they interact, but they're not actually putting in enough effort in who they're hiring and who is engaged into like the fundamental buildings of these technology. And that's when we get kind of, you know, these products that defaults to whoever their audience that is, I'm sorry, their team that are creating the technology.
Thank you for that. Nigel, did you have any follow-up?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Wanda said. Having more diverse teams actually makes better business outcomes, because if you had, people working on some product and they're from all different identities, all different backgrounds, somebody's going to speak up and say like, oh, this doesn't make sense. Why are you doing it that way? Or, why wouldn't it be done this way? You have a lot of different perspectives on the product, and you end up with a better product because you have these conversations. If you have a homogenous workforce, then everybody thinks the same way. Everybody's narrow focus is in the same point, and you're not seeing the outliers, these different circumstances where, oh, what if it doesn't work for my mom, or what if it doesn't work for my grandma because she's like this? And having a team, having a workforce, and ensuring that in the hiring process you have diversity there, it prevents you from getting to the end of the line, unless your employees are just like not vocal about anything. But it prevents you from getting to the end of the product and saying like, oh, it doesn't work for all these people. If your employees are all those people, normally they'll speak up and ask questions and say, I tested it when I built it, it doesn't work for me. That happened a while ago when I was interning at Microsoft. We had used some the Microsoft Vision API, and our team was 2 men and a woman, and it would work for the woman, but not for the 2 men. So even diversity like that is like, okay, there's something off. We need to change some calibration to make sure that it shows up. And then once you see that that's a mistake, you say, okay, let's try it on different skin tones. Okay, let's try it on different ages. And then once you understand that, building a product for me as the employee or me as the person, making the decision doesn't necessarily work for everyone. You want to, reflect the communities that you're going to serve. So all those questions come up, and it may take more time in the process of developing the product, but at the end, you won't, build something that's defaulted to white. You'll build something that works for, the entire community that you're trying to reach out to.
Absolutely. That was, oh, go ahead, Alyssa.
Oh, I was just going to say also, and this is a little bit past the technological development stage, but when you start developing copy, or if you, script out your chatbot, think about the language that you're using and just warm it up. I mean, there's a million ways to say, hey, how can we help you? You can just say that, you can say, what are you looking for? You can say any number of things. And so just think about a voice that that's welcoming. You don't want to, it's not about a white voice or a black voice, or because there's too much play and, and what any of those things could or should or shouldn't be. You just want it to be welcoming, so that even if, even if the technology was or wasn't built for a specific thing, and you've done everything that you can to pull as much bias out of it as possible, the voice is also very important, so people have a sense that they're talking to someone who wants them there, more so than talking to a white person or a black person, or, you don't know who's talking to you. So.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
In places where there's not a lot of flexibility in terms of adding that type of diversity on your team, just having at least one person on that team whose responsibility is to pay attention to that. And so like, and just kind of, that can kind of do that research, that, gather that information, something, right? Just someone who's kind of paying attention to that. I remember a few years ago, I was doing some work in autonomous vehicles, and we were meeting with the state of Florida Department of Transportation, talking about Florida highways and the future of Florida highways, and how are we going to kind of prepare for this. And so we're talking about all the technological needs, and I started asking like, so how are we going to prepare the people? And it was just like, oh, we'll just put like some training manuals. And I'm like, okay, think about this. Florida, right? You have a lot of retirees, you have a lot of elderly people, autonomous vehicles, elderly people. Our solution is training manuals online. Something tells me this is not the way to go. Like, this is going to go bad. And they were like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, understand our population, and our solutions for that is not matching. And though I'm not elderly, right? I'm not of that population. As a UX person, that's just one of the things I'm, trained to pay attention to. And so paying attention to like, who's not part of that conversation that's making up a large population of people that's going to be affected in the state with this change, not preparing for that, like my mind, and I don't know if you guys, there's some like really funky videos about like, elderly people in autonomous vehicles and freaking out. And I'm like, you just see the movie coming together in Florida, and it's horrendous.
Absolutely. This conversation has been rich, and I was just looking at the time. I'm like, oh my gosh, it is like 3 minutes to 7. So I think we should just kind of one last question, one last hurrah. If you can spend like 30 seconds or so answering it, and this is obviously to everyone. How do we keep collectively or individually, how do we keep the conversation going? And I would even say, how do we keep the action going in your opinions?
I can say it in 5 seconds. Don't wait until you're pissed off to do something. Don't wait for an incident. Just continue to do the work.
Mic drop for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think we talked earlier about normalizing things. It shouldn't just be when something happens, we talk about diversity. It should just be normalized in the conversation every day, the way that all other parts of work are normalized. So if we continue talking about it just like it's a component of work and a component of life, I think that continues the conversation going.
And to Nigel's point of normalizing, I think making diversity and inclusion no longer a niche or kind of these special occasion, but tying it to our values, our bottom lines of our initiatives and the things that are really important. Like it's like, moving away from, what seems as a superficial or we'll do something now because it's just kind of a knee-jerk reaction, but tying it to the things that's important, right? In terms of how we're building our businesses, how we're interacting, and the things that, how we're shaping our world right now, right? From the very beginning, right? Corporate culture that matches what you're saying, having those actions visible and clear.
Yes, all of that. I don't even know. Taking all of that, I think just making sure that your actions are towards sustainability, not just the one-off. Like you mentioned, all of you just making sure you're striving. It's not a finite point, and it's a journey that doesn't have a destination, and just being okay that it's going to be a journey without a destination, but it's a good one to be on. And just looking internally, evaluating, making sure you're constantly, checking how you're doing, taking a pulse on your community, your employees. Things are always going to be constantly changing, so making sure you're educating yourself along the way and trying to embed that into the culture, so it's not something people have to go outside of their normal lanes to be inclusive. It's something you just do.
I want to say on behalf of Start GNV, thank you to our panelists for spending time with us, for amplifying the message, for sharing some strategies that are totally actionable in any space that you're in. We know that, at least I know that Start GNV is definitely, not only with this particular session, but in its mission, we really want to drive the innovation ecosystem, and we know we have to do that with intention. And that's the same way we approach diversity and inclusion. And so with that, I want to also thank our attendees, like, for being a part of the conversation. The questions were great. You all, it really shows kind of the great place that Gainesville is to be able to have these conversations and to be vulnerable and to look for answers. So I thought this was great. Thank you all for attending, and you have a wonderful night. Have a good one.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.